and we are now recording the session. So as I mentioned, if you don't want your name, voice, picture, etc. shown, please take care of that now. Our speaker this month is Mark Walker. He'll be talking to us about web recording with open source tools, as you can finally see on the slide he has shared. So I will pass over to Mark, and thank you all for joining, and thank you, Mark, for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you, John, and good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on the time zone you're in. As you can see on the screen, we're talking about web recording with open source tools. So it's kind of a combination here. We're talking open source here. And what we're about is talking about software to locally record and produce a video from a web session on Linux. So you can do a video of a number of different things. The key here is we're putting these different pieces together of the recording a web session like this, so you can get a local recording of it. So Zoom is recording this. Other platforms, Jitsi and others, have the ability to record, Cisco, WebEx, and all that. But you're getting something bundled that is not optimized if you want to make it optimized from a sound standpoint. Okay, now let's see. Let me get into, there we go. Go back just a little bit about me and what's relevant from my experience for this topic is I'm an audio person. I've done professional audio stuff, video not so much, except that I have done some explainer videos under my YouTube channel called Audio Production Quick Take Videos, which are on YouTube. I've also recorded the LUG out here in Frederick, Maryland, Frederick Open Source. And I've been recording those for the past several years with OBS Studio, streaming to YouTube. And of course, it's not that easy editing something from YouTube. And so once COVID hit and we went all virtual, I didn't want to stream directly. I had the ability to do a little bit more. And so over a period of months of trial and error, I'm going to share with you the results of my experience with recording a web session in OBS Studio. I did this presentation last week for the FOS LUG, and it was kind of tricky because I was actually eating my own dog food doing what I was talking about. That video was successful. I did all the things that I was talking about in the presentation, and that success is up on YouTube as well. So let's get into what we're going to talk about today. Some things that you need to think about first is plan it out. You really do need to sit down and think it through before you just hit the record if you're putting together something that you really want to have control over. So after the planning considerations, we'll be talking about OBS Studio, which is a key element of basically a triad of tools that you need to use. I'm also going to be addressing the audio part of the video recording because that is one of the things that can really trip you up, especially with PulseAudio. You might recall 10 years ago or so, there was a lot of hating on PulseAudio. It has really improved lately, and it's in pretty good shape, but you have to be aware of its quirks, especially its dynamic quirks with PulseAudio changing the rules on you as you go. And we'll talk about some of those things too. The third thing we're going to talk about is the Shotcut video editor. I've produced videos with the OpenShot open source video editor. Once I was introduced to Shotcut, I switched over to that because to me, Shotcut was a little bit easier to use, but there are some things about Shotcut that OpenShot does that Shotcut doesn't, has to do with changing layers of video tracks, and that can be significant depending on what you're doing, and we'll talk about some of those considerations as well. I'm also talking about using the image editor, the GNU image processing program, to produce what I call overlays for your videos. Why would you need to do that? In cases where you need to obfuscate or cover up something, or change, or maybe put an explainer box in some of the things you're doing. That's where you would do that with an overlay. And we'll talk about how to produce that to cover up a specific portion of the video after you've actually gotten the raw recording of the video. There's specific steps to go through. These are things that I have tried and done, and these are like, proven, fleshed out things to do. And then the last thing I'll talk about, just things that most of you who have ever posted anything on YouTube or any other social media platform, some things to think about as some of your when you do post it to YouTube. Planning considerations. If you're recording a web browser session, for example, we have this Zoom session here, and you want to take your browser or your Zoom window, and that's what you want to record in. That's what you want to record. It's a good idea to put your browser into full screen mode via F11 or some other means. What this does, it does a couple of things. One, it keeps people from kind of looking at all the other tabs you have open. Why would that matter? Well, if it's one of your tabs is personal email and someone sends you an email with personal information that they intend for only you, and you're recording it for something that you're going to broadcast, that's not a good idea. The second thing it does is it utilizes all the real estate that your recording is capturing. That's all content. You don't have all this extra stuff like the menu bar and all that kind of thing. So it's just something to consider, putting your browser in full screen mode first. And then it's also, I'm not doing it today because I double checked with the others and said, we don't have feedback or anything, and I'm not hearing feedback on me. Zoom is good about that, about canceling feedback. Other platforms are not. So if you're on another platform that doesn't cancel getting an echo, it can affect your recording. And in those cases, you definitely do want to use headphones. A main thing to be planned for is to confirm that your PulseAudio settings are correct when you are in the record mode. More than once, I have gotten everything aligned just right in PulseAudio, hit record, and all of a sudden these news sources and syncs show up in PulseAudio, and it just, I found discovered belatedly that I wasn't recording something that I needed to record. One presentation I was able to recover because it was the speaker was talking about himself and his background, but it was during a portion of the presentation when his slide was showing all those things, his background, what his skills were, where he'd worked and what he worked on and all those kinds of things. So I really didn't lose any information. The way I solved that problem is I have some music licensed that I simply put a music bed underneath that portion, and that was kind of a recovery for that. But a way to make sure that you have it right is set yourself and record. Once you have OBS Studio and record, switch over to PulseAudio and double check that everything is right there. It's just a step to keep in mind there. The other thing to consider in OBS Studio is selecting the screen area to record. This is true for anything, vocoder or the other screen capture utilities. Usually they give you an option of capturing a monitor or a window. It's probably a good idea to select the screen area that you want OBS Studio to record. Or if it's your web browser and you have the web browser in full screen mode, that might be very workable too. It's just a matter of double checking to make sure that you're getting the right video size. The other thing to do, as I've mentioned this before, is ensure that the audio from both the remote and the local audio is being recorded in OBS Studio. And I'll be showing that later this morning in the presentation about to make sure that you're doing that. If you've worked with OBS Studio, you probably know this like the back of your hand, but it's always good to double check and look at some things. Some of you who are working with OBS might have some other suggestions as well. But That's something to be sure of, because that can bite you as well. You can everything perfectly. You think, oh, I'm hearing both people. Yeah, that's because they're both coming through this one channel. And when you start to record, you have only your voice or only their voice. And I've had situations where it's both. You want to make sure that you're setting up both. And I'm showing how to do that in this. And of course, double check that all of this is happening, and just know where to double check. Because I had earlier put this together for the purpose of recording, I couldn't very well show OBS Studio while I was using OBS Studio. I have some video recordings embedded in the slides. That there are a couple of advantages to that. One is, you all know about live demos. When you're trying to live demo something, it just goes berserk. Anything could go wrong. Famous Bill Gates and the blue screen of death in one of his demos. So some of these demo videos are very short, like 15 or 20 seconds. One of them is about a minute long. I just found that I'm using LibreOffice Impress here. That's what you're viewing right now. And I could not find a means to pause the video inside it. So I'll start when I go to the slide, the video will start, and then I'll describe what's happening as you can follow the cursor. So I just wanted you to know that's what you're going to see. After we're done with the slides, if you want to, since I'm not recording, I can open up OBS Studio, I can open up Shotcut, I can open up anything and share that screen, and we can play around with some stuff there. Here's an example of a video, but although this is an example, OBS Studio is used by some professional broadcast stations. It's not a toy. It is a fully professional quality utility. A couple of things about OBS Studio is it has configurable, what it calls scenes. I tend to think of them as profiles, because that's really what you're doing. You're selecting different profiles or personalities for a particular thing you want to display. If the term scenes seemed kind of, I get what they're trying to do there, but if it might help to think of them also as profiles, because that's what they are too. You're profiling something that you want to show in your scene. There are selectable sources in OBS Studio for when you're capturing a web cap session. You want the video or the window capture. That's one source in OBS Studio. The other thing to set up is the audio capture, which you can double check in the audio mixer panel, which is shown here. And also the other thing, if you're using something like an image, or we were talking about that just earlier this morning before the meeting, using a chroma key, a background with the chroma key. For example, right now I'm using a green screen and a photograph that I took at a park nearby. But I'm using, this is in Zoom. You can also, I've also made videos with this kind of thing in OBS Studio and just recording a video. If you're recording a web capture, depending on what you're doing, you may or may not want to do that. And if you are not the subject, of course, the chroma key is not really relevant, because you're not doing that. You're capturing the window. But those are things to consider in OBS Studio. In terms of confirming your remote and local audio, the audio mixer panel that's a part of OBS Studio, we'll show this later, is a way of confirming you want both of these channels. You want the input capture and the output capture, and you want to see sound from both of them. And that's part of the way, even when it's showing up in PulseAudio, this is where it's really happening as far as your recording is concerned. Because if it's not showing up in your OBS Studio audio mixer, chances are like 99.9 or 100%, it's not going to be recorded in your recording. OBS, by default, saves it to an MKV file, Matroska multimedia container file. That's a great format. You can break out the sound from it. You can break out the video from it with either a video editor like Shotcut or an audio editor like FFmpeg. It's very useful. So that's a good container file. Okay, here's the video source selection in OBS Studio. You click the little plus key here. Let me see if I can get okay, here we go. And then you select the window capture. So I'm going to select my window capture here. What I want to capture something on my computer. So I'm going to add it. I'm going to create new, and I'm going to select. In this case, I am VNC'd into another machine, and I'm going to, in this case, select a Windows machine that I have on my LAN that I want to record. This is just an example. I really don't do this as I had no need for it, but a use case where you might have something that is on another computer or somebody that's sending you something else. That's going to show what you're capturing. So it's going to put it up there and you need to resize it. So you can grab the handle and notice that it keeps the same aspect ratio. And then you can grab the center of it and then put it in the center of your view. So yes, if you had a different aspect ratio, you might be able to stretch it out to fill the entire OBS Studio area. You could do that now with an aspect ratio like that, except that you're going to lose it. You're going to lose part of it because you're going to push some of it out of the way. So one key element here is you need to have your source, for example, your browser. In this case, I'm using the Remina remote viewing utility. But if you're doing it with a browser, you still need to have that, whatever it is, you need to have it already open. For example, in this example, I already had Remina open, and I already had this machine that I was connected to. I selected it, and that's what I went to. So that's just make sure whatever source you want to select for OBS Studio, make sure it's already there and visible so that it's there for OBS to see it and then present to you to select it. Okay, now let's talk about audio. So I've got audio input and audio output. You right click it and then select its properties. So you can pick it from, let your input be your webcam, or it can be something else. It can be be your regular input. The output capture, as far as OBS Studio is concerned, is what's coming into you from the remote side. So in this case, I'm just going to pick it from, well, I'm showing in the video my HDMI. No, I'm not. I'm picking my default audio, which is my internal audio, which is what I wanted to use. But that's what I'm selecting. So my input capture in this case with the audio mixer screen, which you can see down there in the lower center, that's showing the input capture, because of those settings, is the webcam on this machine. The output capture is the internal audio, which in this case is also going to be anything coming through as far as audio from the remote web session. And this is where you want to make sure that you have audio levels from both of those, that your local microphone's working, and when somebody from the remote area side is talking, you see that the level kicking up in the audio output capture. PulseAudio is very helpful, and I say that with a little bit of tongue in cheek. It does give you a lot more precise control than the advanced Linux sound architecture functions. You can put PulseAudio away and do it fully in ALSA, but you're going to be doing a lot of tweaking, and you're just working at a lower level in the machine. There was a time when I just said, forget PulseAudio, I'm going to work with ALSA. You don't have to do that so much anymore. PulseAudio has really matured in the past few years. PulseAudio controls which apps use which sound sources. And the next couple of screens will see the PulseAudio volume control and where you can select which sources and how to set their levels. For what it's worth, I have the PulseAudio volume control up on my other monitor, and I'm keeping an eye on it to make sure. And if for some reason I'm not hearing, I'm not coming through somebody, please let me know. But it controls which apps use your sound sources, and we'll look at that. The thing about PulseAudio is it's dynamically responsive to new sources and syncs. It's great about if you plug in a microphone, PulseAudio is going to see it as soon as the system recognizes it. That's really useful. That can be really useful, especially if you're doing something in the fly. Oh, I need to plug in a new set of headphones. I need to bring in this other remote connection. And it's going to see that. If it's a sound source, PulseAudio in a normal operation will see that. A command line tool to open the GUI from the command line is a PAVU control. It's all one word. You enter that in your bash terminal, for example, and that will open a GUI for the PulseAudio volume control. You can see what that command means. PA, PulseAudio, VU, volume control is a way, and the next slide is going to be what that looks like. Again, I want to emphasize again, check after you start recording to ensure that PulseAudio is still routing things correctly, because it will change, because it says, oh, I have a change in recording. I need to redo this. Yes, you want to make sure it redoes it in the way you want it to for your recording before you get too far down the road in your recording and you say, oh no, I just lost 10 minutes of very useful content and I can't really go back and make my presenter say that again. And so it's something to think about beforehand. There are alternatives to PulseAudio. The Jack Audio Connection Kit is used by professional audio people on Linux, primarily musicians or recording studios. I've used Jack successfully. The thing about Jack is, though, you have to have dedicated equipment to use Jack, because once you have it set up, you tweak it and you don't touch it. You have all your routing, all your virtual patch bay connections set up in Jack. You leave that alone. That if you're doing things on a machine you use for other things like an occasional web session recording, Jack's really not going to be that practical for you. And so hopefully in the future, as things like recording utilities like Ardor and other systems that may need Jack or used to need Jack, those may change to where they can work with something else. I have found that there is a new utility in development right now. I think you can install it if you want to, but it's called Pipewire, and it's intended, as I understand it from my reading, to eventually replace PulseAudio. And I think eventually, in some use cases, it might also replace Jack. It's promising to be very powerful, and perhaps not have some of the quirks that PulseAudio has. PulseAudio and both PulseAudio and Jack are rather long in the tooth, and it's perhaps time for something newer to take a fresh look at things. And I would say keep an eye on the development of Pipewire. We may see something that we may want to adopt in the future. This is a view or screen capture of the PulseAudio volume control. You may see that I have highlighted the recording tab in this case, because that, if you're recording something, that's the tab you want to be looking at. This, very important, this is after you've clicked the Start Recording button in OBS Studio, because only then are you going to see some of these things show up in your recording tab. Otherwise, it may be blank. If you're not recording anything, the recording tab isn't going to have anything in it, because PulseAudio has nothing. There's nothing for PulseAudio to see that's recording. A couple of things here. These are the two things we had in OBS Studio. The desktop audio, which is like the output, and here's the input audio, which is basically my webcam. These buttons here, if you click this, it opens up a pull-down menu with radio buttons to select these different sources that are going to be recorded in these things. So I have selected the webcam for my local and the built-in audio analog stereo for my remote, because that's where the web Chrome or whatever browser you're using is going to put it there, because that's the only other place it has. So that's something that you're usually safe for your remote to pick the built-in analog stereo. The only time that would be a problem, and you would never be doing this anyways. If you had like VLC or some other media player playing something else for some reason and you didn't want that in your recording, there would be no point. I mean, you wouldn't be using that. So you're probably safe in just taking whatever your internal sound system sound is providing for your output. Make sure that you check these sources, and that's the reason I made the comment here this is where it's something to pay attention to. Yes, it's patently obvious from looking at this recording, screen capture, but I'm doing this for emphasis because you really want to pay attention to this and make sure that's right. And again, after you start recording. After you have your recording, you've saved the MKV file and you've got all that. Now you're going to want to edit that in Shotcut. So we've transitioned from saving. Our web session is over. We've said, thank you, everybody. I've stopped recording now. And when you stop recording in OBS Studio, you say stop recording. There's a stop recording button, and it saves it as an MKV file in the path that you have told it to in settings. That's another thing. Look at your path so you can find your recording file. I usually have like a staging area where I put these recordings, and then I move them into my working directory. And then I make a copy of them before I do anything else. This is just standard, safety practices for any kind of editing, especially something that you've worked so hard to capture, from a live web session that isn't going to happen again. Shotcut is a pretty decent video editor from my experience with it. No, it doesn't have the exact, millisecond, precision in some areas, but for the most part, can do just about anything you need to produce a professional looking video with it. It is not in the main repositories. You have to install RPM Fusion on Fedora, and I'm sure you have to do the similar things on any of the Debian-based distros and into apt-get install Shotcut. But it's there, it's available. If not, you can go to the shotcut.org website and download it. The only downside to installing it directly is if you do it from your distro's repositories, obviously every time you update, you're going to pick up all the updates from your distros. And there are improvements coming through with the updates. So not only for security reasons, but for functional reasons, if it's in the repository, I always look there first to see if I can get an application that way. Shotcut uses layered tracks. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more as we go on. They have video tracks and audio tracks. And you also can use still images by dragging a still image into a video track. It will set the still image to run a default amount of time, which you can adjust, usually by grabbing the end of the image in the timeline and stretching it or compressing it to however long you want that image to display. But I've got some examples of that coming up here in that. Shotcut has a main display area. It's sort of like your working palette, if you wanted to call it that, showing real-time changes. You change something, you put something on top of something, or you cut out something, it shows up right away. That's very useful. You don't have to wait. You see immediately. It shows what's happening as you go. That's worthy. Some more terminology that's kind of quirky from my perspective. Shotcut has an area called a playlist area. It's really yes, it does work as a playlist. If you were to say, start playing this, and it will play this, that, and then the next thing in the playlist, that. I really don't see much of a use for that because you're really using the timelines, and I'll show you the difference when we get to that part. Yes, go ahead.
There's a question in chat.
Go ahead.
I'm assuming this is about Shotcut. If not, then correct me. But it's saying, is there a convenient way of applying an audio filter effect to a microphone input via the system setup?
Yes, you. Okay. That's a good question. When you're recording, you would want to put any kind of filter, like you would apply a filter like that at the time of recording via OBS Studio. So you would go in the settings of whatever settings OBS Studio gives you for a microphone, any microphone filtering. I don't do it that way. I take all the audio I can get, full bandwidth that the microphone source or microphone or audio source provides into the recording, and then I deal with all that filtering in post-production processing afterward. So yes, you would do that, but you wouldn't do it in Shotcut. You would do it in OBS Studio at the time of recording, or you would do it post-production processing external to Shotcut as I get to that part for the audio. I think there are some audio filters you can do in Shotcut because it does have a large number of filters you could apply. So that's kind of, I don't know whether that really answers, the answer to your question is yes, there are, but I don't know exactly how useful they are. Is there a follow-on question to that?
From my use of OBS, there's a ton of filters. My typical problem is there's so many options and properties around them that for someone who may not be an audiophile, it may not be that easy to figure out which one to tweak. But one of the things that I've often used is I can put in a noise gate. So I don't get a lot of background noise. When people don't talk, I don't hear any fuss or anything else like that on the line when I record. That's from my perspective. Noise suppression or noise gates is what I've been using. But you can do all kinds of other weird stuff on the filtering.
Yes, yes, acknowledged. I do it a little bit differently from that. I do all of my noise processing post-production, and especially, I'm not sure I want to do something like a Vox, it cuts out unless somebody's talking, because usually, unless you have because the Vox response time is going to cut out like the beginning of someone's, a leading plosive, for example, in someone's opening statement or whatever. I prefer myself to do that filtering, and maybe that's because I'm more comfortable editing an audio file and processing the noise out of it after that, than trying to. So when I do capture, yes, I capture all that background noise. But depending on if you're more comfortable setting something in OBS Studio, but as you mentioned, OBS Studio's filters, it's like doing the multi-band mixing. I've tried playing with multi-band mixing. I've never been able to change something to my own satisfaction to my own ear. And except if I wanted to do that, I could do it in post. If you capture, here's a philosophical question. I'm not saying anything's right or wrong. I just to share a philosophical thought on that subject because it is important. I prefer to capture everything raw as it is, and then if I change my mind about what I want, I can change it in post-production. But if you try to do it on the input side of things, whatever you've chosen on the input side of things, you've kind of boxed yourself in to those filter choices. And then, however, if that works for you and you know exactly what you want, then you don't have to take the post-production time to do that. Mm-hmm. That's a perspective on that. There are just two different ways to approach something. You can do it either way. You need to consider which way is going to work best for you. There may be some reasons, and you may have reasons for wanting to do that filtering at the front end. It's just my personal preference is to do that kind of work in the back end.
In my case, it's because it's live broadcasts, right? I don't want someone's microphone to pick up noises when they put down a cup or breathe or something else on a live broadcast. So I need to have some level of filtering to ensure that low level of sounds don't make it through on the live. But you're right. If you set it too aggressive, you risk cutting out what you really want to hear. And that's don't put it aggressive, and then you can always deal with some of it in post.
It's a good, it's the thing about the use case of someone putting a coffee mug down on a loud coaster or something like that. I'm not sure, you would almost have to know ahead of time what the waveform is that coaster is going to do it. And since that person is sitting in an area that you don't have control over, I'm not sure that I would be able to predetermine what that characteristic would be to filter out.
It's hard. Typically, would you look at it before the recording starts to see when people are talking? And it could just be as simple as the wire rubbing against the close, and you can pick that up if they have the microphone on the close.
I'm not sure how you could filter out, like someone has a microphone from their earbuds and it's rubbing against their clothing. I don't know that you would have to like use nation state level, audio processing to be able to cut that out. Because it's mixed in with their voice.
Yeah, it's not perfect, but I mean, that's what I mean by there's a ton of options in those filters.
There are a ton of
once you start messing with them, it's not a matter of necessarily just cut off this frequency and that frequency.
That's absolutely right. That's so true.
It's not perfect. And I agree with you, the best place to do it is post-production, but my use case is live broadcast and being sure that you don't get as much as noise as you otherwise would do.
In the live broadcast use case, then obviously there is no post-production.
Well, there is. You want to make a recording afterwards.
Well, no, yeah, I mean during the live part. Yes, exactly. During the live part, there is and chances are some of that stuff is going to slip through during the live part, which you might be able to pull out in post-production.
Been there, done that, but I'm taking up your time. Please continue.
No, these are good considerations, a good thing. Even if you don't do anything, just know why you're not doing it. Or if you do something, to know that's why you want to do it. And these are all good considerations to think about. Let me pick up where I was talking about the playlist, because I think that's important. The terminology again. When I say playlist, and Shotcut calls it a playlist. Yes, you can use it as a playlist, but you wouldn't in this case. So I consider it a staging area. So when I see playlists in Shotcut, I think staging area, because that's really what you're using it for. And then the other useful thing about Shotcut and OpenShot is the same way. You can grab these little handles for the windows and scale them in comparison to each other. That's very, very useful. And sometimes if I want to work more in the video tracks, then I can squish up the main area, and I can still see what's going on in the main area. But it gives me a chance to zoom in on the video and audio track. That works out very well too. Let me go get my cursor back in my. Okay. This is I was going to do the screenshot of Shotcut, and I found this Creative Commons licensed picture on the web, and I added a couple of things of my own on here. But I think this is a good little tour of the of Shotcut. Shotcut can look like someone said, "Oh, it looks like a airline pilot's control, and it's so it puts you off." Well, that's why we're doing this talk, so that you can say what not to worry about. Let me go back into the playlist area. This is a playlist. This is why I call it a staging area. So here's the main menu, and a lot of this is some of this is redundant. You can click to show the timeline. What they mean by timeline is this stuff down here. And so this is the timeline. Here it's showing you a video track, which also has audio in it, by the way, and it's showing you an audio track. So you can have audio coming from different sources down here. But the reason I call this a staging area is I'll grab you can grab something over here, click and drag it down to your timeline. That's how I put stuff in the timeline. You can also right click it and say enter it to timeline. But the reason I like to drag it is I could show this is exactly where I want this to be, and you release the mouse button and it copies it down here. It does not remove it from. So if you have an image up here that you want to use over and over again as like an overlay or even a background, you can drag it again and again and do different things with it. This is in Shotcut, this is applying a filter. Now, when you're talking about filter here in Shotcut, you're talking about maybe a transition filter, or to make it sepia or monochrome or something like that. That's what they mean by filter there. And to show the playlist, you can click this. There's another way to do it too. If I want to not show this playlist, I can click the little X here, and like in many applications, it makes that go away. Similar to like a PDF reader, for example. You don't want to see the table of contents. You just click the thing to make it, either make it collapse or make it, it's the same thing there. So you're doing the similar things here. This is the main work area. So if I want to add a new file here, I'll go up here and I'll say open file. Just like it, you don't add, you open, like so in OpenShot, I think they call it import. Shotcut calls it open. You open the file, and anything you open, whether it's a sound file or a video file, whether it's an MKV or an MP4 or whatever your OGG, Theora, or whatever you're using, it'll pull it in here, and then it starts to play it. So whatever you're doing with your timeline, these are the player controls. You can play, you can stop, you can skip to the front or the back. So if I haven't added this yet, to this part here to the playlist yet, I left click it and I drag it over here to the playlist, and now it's still showing in the main area, but I have it indexed over here in the playlist, so that whenever I want to, my staging area is what I prefer to call it, and then I can left click it and drag it in there. Another thing, if I want to add, you can also do the plus, just like OBS Studio. But again, the click and drag has worked pretty well for me. And again, I'm working doing all of this in Fedora Linux. So all of these things are working. The main thing to use the other thing over here, and I added this because he didn't include this, and I thought it was important. When you're ready to render something. So over here, the rendering is done with the export. I'm trying to find where the export, there's a button up here that says export. You also can click down here for export. So when you're ready to export your file, export to say MP4 or whatever, this will show the status of the job. If your video is only 3 minutes long or something, it'll be done in like a minute or so rendering. If your video is like a long web session, like this session here, okay, go ahead and click render. It'll say, okay, I'm 1% done, and go do something else. Go out to lunch and come back. And I've done that. And then when it's finally done, it'll have a little green check mark there. So this is pretty useful. I like the work area of Shotcut. And again, this is after you take your original MKV file and you open it and you pull it, you'll see it into your main viewing area. Oh, let me go back for a minute. The next slide is going to be this, starting off this hamburger menu here, timeline menus. So that's what I want to, this timeline area is where you're going to be doing most of your work in Shotcut. So let's take a look at what that is. That hamburger menu, if you click it, it opens up some options. Usually you want to add another video track or add an audio track. I don't know that if you want to make the tracks taller or shorter, you can do that. But you can also do that by dragging. Another thing you can do is you can remove a track if you want to do that. So usually adding a video track, and this is where I'm going to be talking about a quirk in Shotcut that you want to be prepared for. I would always add an extra video track, even though you might not think you need it. I would say add more video tracks and work on the bottom one for your main base video, so that any effects or overlays you want to put, you have these blank tracks up here. The reason you want to do that, add these video tracks first, is they open Shotcut will add the track at the bottom. You don't want something underneath what you're doing. You want to have these vacant tracks above so you can add overlays that you might decide to put in later. Here's an example of splitting a track. So you go to a part in the timeline, click it, and then use this little split at playhead. And yes, it uses that, and there you can see it splits on 2, and then you can make room or move something with that. If you'd like me to play that again, call out and I'll back up the slide and come back, make it happen again. Some terminology here again is that I love the way audio and video editors use old analog tape terminology. Playhead. It's not a playhead, that's a pointer in the software, but it's very useful reference terminology, and I think it is useful. And of course, you're splitting. This is just like an old tape splicer. That's really all you're doing. You're splicing the tape at that point, splitting it apart. And here you could put in another piece of video, an image, whatever you want to do. And we're dealing with a video track because it has V in there, V for video and A for audio. And so you can either delete or move the track for that. The audio component is something to consider, and I've learned this through hard knocks. The one thing you want to do is to do all of your trimming. Suppose you have you're doing your I had a situation last week. My phone rang during my presentation, and so I hiccuped the presentation. We had to stop. That's not useful for the viewer. So when I brought that raw video into Shotcut, I split it at the beginning of that phone call, just like you saw in the previous slide here, and then, excuse me, sorry, and then I go to the end of that disruption to where I pick up again with the content, and I split it again. Then I select that part in between the two splits. I select that and then delete it, and then drag what was downstream of that up next to it, and it gives a very nice. You can do, if you do it correctly, you can make it to where if you weren't looking for it, you wouldn't even know there was an interruption. But you want to do that kind of editing first. Otherwise, when you export the audio from the result, if you export the audio that's not completely aligned, if I exported the audio first and it had that interruption in it, I'd have to go in and also separately edit the audio and make that put together. And it's very difficult to get everything aligned afterward, where you have the lip syncing correct as far with the audio. So if you export the audio and re-import it, you want that audio to be the exact same timing as what you have in the video. Otherwise, you're going to play, excuse me, it's going to be a very difficult time getting that audio lined up with the video. You've got better things to do with your day than try to put that together. And also not have it exactly aligned, because you probably won't get it aligned because you don't have the specific, if that audio isn't completely aligned up to a specific frame, video frame, and how's that going to happen? It's going to be difficult to get just right. And so the best thing to do is do all of your editing first with the composite video, then export the audio, and the audio that you process is then going to be aligned with your video. External to Shotcut, and I don't talk about this here in this, how to do that. That's more audio. I think I talked about that with the audio talk a few months ago. But you do the same thing to that. You level it, meaning say you have one of the people on your session has low audio for whatever reason. They've got there, and Zoom tries to level everybody's audio. Zoom actually does a very good job of that. But if you're on a different platform, or that person's audio is really low, and then you have somebody else that's really shouting into their microphone and their level is really high, you can normalize that. There's a thing called the Levelator by the Conversations Network. It's open source. It was written back in 2011, but it still does a wonderful job. And it's not being maintained anymore, but I use it as long as it continues to work. It's great at that. I used to do it manually. Peter, you know, some of my early FredPod podcasts, like I'd record Software Freedom Day, and I would manually, I'd spent a good afternoon manually, you know, leveling out the audio. That's before I discovered this other tool, and it does make a difference. And then, of course, you want to normalize it, which is a different topic of its own, but do that processing so that what you get out of this is you're going to get a fuller sounding audio. So when, like if you click on a bunch of different YouTube videos, some of them sounds really low, some of them will punch your ears out. You want something that's going to be just right, you know, probably a peak a couple of 2 or 3 dB below 0 dBFS. And you have some level there that's, you know, somewhere like minus 10 or 15 dBFS or LUFS, depending on how you're processing it. But that's a whole different topic. But you want to perfect your audio. Detach the audio from the original video track and discard it. You don't need it anymore. So because you've already processed the audio and it's the same audio. Now remember, you still have your original MKV file, so you still have the original audio in the original file as well as the original video. So you're not losing anything. So you detach that audio because you're not going to use it. You re-import your processed audio and align the beginning of your audio right at the beginning of your video. And because they're the same timeline, the lip syncs will be aligned. Somebody points to something as they're talking. All that will be aligned. And so it's so much easier to align it when you do that. And I found that it's worth it. Okay, here's the audio component of it. And here I'm going to, I think, detach the audio. Here we go. So look what it does. You already had an audio track, but when you detach the audio from the video channel, it created a new audio track. Excuse me for a second. It created a new audio track. So then what you can do here is what I would do is I just delete this first audio track because you don't need it. If you don't have anything in it, you don't need it. And so there's the extracted audio from it. And it's this that you would export. So export it as WAV. You want it as a WAV file. And this example, I already had a file name for it. So I just overwrote it. And you want it in a WAV container or some other RAFF container file where you have PCM audio, and you need the pulse code modulation audio to allow you to do the normalization processing. You don't want to have any other encoding for the audio that you want to process. You don't want to make it any kind of, even FLAC it is encoded differently to where normalization utilities might not be able to work with it. And any other kind of encoding such as lossy encoding like MP3 or OGG Vorbis, not for normalization. Now you can encode it into those later for mastering and distribution, but not while you're normalizing. You want to process your audio when it's in PCM format, and then now if I'm re-importing it back into my Shotcut project, yes, import the WAV file. Import the WAV file because you want that perfect non-lossy audio in your project. You don't want to introduce any more audio loss, any audio quality loss than you can avoid otherwise. That's just important. especially if someone's going to be listening to your video with earbuds that aren't going to be as high quality, and they're going to be losing a lot of the quality. You want as much quality up front as you can in your video. Now, the next topic is using GIMP to produce overlays. Now, yeah, this is an image editor, but you're using this for your overlay. Let me tell you about the use case for this. We had a presentation in FOSLUG a few months ago where the presenter showed something that showed his private IP. They weren't private like private space like 192.168 or 10.0 or 172.1.6 or whatever. They were IP addresses though on servers that maybe you could show it to like a group here, but you're not going to hack your system. But if I take something like that and put it in the public, he asked me to blot those out. And so yes, I can do that. But you do that, this is where you need those, this is where you have use for the video track over top of your main video track in Shotcut. And that's the reason you want to put all these blank video tracks in Shotcut before you start working. And you put your main video in the lowest track so that you can put this stuff on top of it. The steps that you're about to see in the next several slides are steps that I went through to produce this. And then I'll show a recording of actually doing it. The first thing you want to do is to make a screenshot of the screen in your video that the overlay will cover. The only thing this is going to do for you is to be a guide to see what part you're going to blot out. So then you open up GIMP. Or some other video editor, whatever one that's GIMP is good for this. You open your screenshot, either from the saved file or from the clipboard. You open it as a layer in GIMP. And then you scale it to the same ratio as your video. It doesn't have to be the exact pixel length. You just want it to be the same ratio. And the reason that is you can then scale the overlay that you have is going to be scaled the same way as your video. The next thing you do is create a new layer on top of the one with your screenshot. Now remember, your screenshot's underneath just to give you a reference point, and to create and then make that with other background, like a solid layer or something like that. White, I've used yellow. It doesn't matter because you're going to blank that out anyway. With this next step, you're going to mask it with a new layer. And you want the mask is to make it transparent. What GIMP says is it calls it black. Think about black as being clear. This is how I understand it. Black equals clear. In other words, black is full transparency. Think red, green, blue, all values 0 because it's not going to put anything on there. Now that plus the alpha layer is not going to show up. In your new masked layer, you select the area to be obscured. You can see the area you want to obscure because since you have made your top layer transparent, what you're now seeing is your screenshot so that you can see the area that you want to obscure, like the area where the IP addresses are, for example. Then you select that and then you bucket fill that with a fill color or some other pattern, yellow or white or whatever. It would be, say if your background is white, make the fill color be white so that all people see is the text on top of it. Then if you want to put text on it, it's like, I think I put text, IP obscured, for privacy or whatever, or just IP obscured for the video. You put your text as an additional layer. So you have your screenshot layer, you have the transparent layer, you have the box that you've drawn that's bucket filled as a layer, and then you have your text layer, which is on top of all that on there. Then you make the original screenshot layer not visible. So you want the alpha channel to take that out of there. And in GIMP, you could do it by unselecting the eye icon in there, make it not visible. So now all you have is this transparency with this block in the middle with this text on top of it. And that's what you see. Then you export that to a PNG. PNG works great. It keeps the alpha channel intact. And you could use another format if you wanted to, but PNG is just fine. And if you're in GIMP, save it to a GIMP project file, a .xcf. And what that gives you is if you try it in your video and it doesn't overlay exactly right, you can come back and bring it back up and do further editing. Or you can save that as a template to use later if you're doing a bunch of explainer videos and you're talking about an application where the screen has this text or something that's in the middle, or it has, you know, something, someone's private information you don't want to spew all over the world, or whatever. You can use that as a template or as a label. Anyway, you can use that to come back to and use later. Then you import your exported image into the top video track in Shotcut. And by putting it in the video track that's above your main video track, it's going to overlay, it's going to block out anything with the video tracks below it. Okay, here's how we're going to do it in GIMP. I open as layers. I made a screenshot of a web page, and I'm going to open that as a screenshot. Now it's that current time part is this part here I'm going to overlay. So I'm going to create a new layer. So over here, I'm going to create a new layer, and here it is. Here's my new layer, and it's filled with, it's white, but I want to make that transparent. So here's my, over here is the mask. That's a mask. And so right now, see, I've selected black, full transparency. I'm going to add that. No, okay, so it's still here. The white's still there, but it's masked out. So the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to select an area. And this area here, if this is the text that I want to overwrite, and this is just an example, and I'm going to take this text, I'm going to bucket fill it. Now note where we're working. We're working at the layer above this, but the screenshot, the layer below it is showing through because the layer we're working on is transparent at this point until we bucket fill this box in here. So I'm going to bucket fill that box as soon as I can. The beauty of doing this as a recording is you don't get to watch me fumbling around putting together. I cut out all the fumble parts so you don't have to be bored with that. So look what we have now. We have layers here, this box layer here. Now I'm going to put the text file in, and here's going to be my text and all my doing the font and everything with the text. Get that all set up just right. I'm going to type in some text here. There's my text, and this is what I've got. My text overlay. So over here, you've got the text overlay. And I think I've got an extra layer here I don't need. So at this point, I'm going to save. Control S is like a muscle reflex for me because, you know, you've burned so many times, you know, to do that. When you're working with audio and video or any kind of media, save as you go. Okay, now I've made my underlying screenshot invisible. This is what my overlay would look like. Oops, something's wrong there. I need to move my text box over to my overlay box, which does cover the area I want to overlay. My text overflows it. So one way I'm going to solve this problem, in this case, you could solve it any number of ways. I'm solving this by simply reducing the font size in this case until I can make it fit into my box. And so that works. So now I've got now I've got my overlay, my text over top of my box, which is overlaying the transparency, which is overlaying my screenshot, which I'm using as a guide. And so now I'm simply going to save this as a PNG, or rather export it as a PNG after I saved it as a project. And so then I'm going to, now I'm going to export it as a PNG. And I'm just accepting the defaults here. And in my example, it did work. And so I'm named it, I handled the name, I call it overlay, so I know what I'm looking for. It's easy for me to find. And so that's another reason. File name convention for your project is very, very, very useful, especially when you're trying to find something, but that's just a generalized thing. So so now I have this, look what I've got. This is underneath it. I don't need this anymore. but I'm using it simply as a guide so that this, when it goes onto my video, is going to cover up the part that I want covered up. So I'm using it as a guide. So double checking, making it visible again to make sure that I have it exactly where I want it. But that's not my exported PNG. My exported PNG doesn't have the website below it. And of course, I'm saving again. Now, as soon as this is over with, the resultant PNG is this. Now for this screen, this slide, I simply added the blue background so you can see that the blue background is basically going to be alpha channel transparent, but I wanted to show that because you need that sizing to make it fit where it needs to go. And this PNG goes in the video track above the track that has that part that you want to cover up. And so this does work. It doesn't take, it is workable if you walk it by the numbers, and it's doable, and it's not too much tear your hair out. And it gives you a tremendous capability in showing only the things you want shown in your video. The other thing that I ran into, and finally, this really isn't, recording and editing, but you're going to publish your video somewhere. Yeah, you may put it up on a Dropbox or something like that. But for YouTube, I post things to YouTube and SoundCloud for the podcast I do with my daughter. And both of them, the thing is, write up a little description in a text file before you start. So you're not sitting there with it waiting for you to do something. You think, again, it goes back to planning. You think it through beforehand. What's this about? Write my description. Like John asked the next month's speaker, for a description of his presentation. You want to have that description ready. He asked me for my description too. I mean, I asked my speakers for a description in the FOS log. I mean, it's something you do. And so you want to know that. The another thing is to have the tags ready. Think about tags, because that's how things are found. That's how Google search works, or one of the things it uses to work. So a comma sets a tag. That's true in both YouTube and SoundCloud. I'm sure in many other platforms as well. You can have multi-word tags, like video space editing, comma, that's a tag. And that's very useful. YouTube asks you not to close your browser tab after clicking publish because it's uploading your video. You don't want to interrupt that, obviously. And that's another thing. If you have an hour-long video, that it's going to take a good long while for whatever, depending on what your internet connection is, to upload to YouTube. Again, go out to lunch, go do something else, or do some other project on your computer. Just don't close that browser tab. And you can always return later to edit the description and the tags. These are now the important takeaways in quick review is to know how all of these components are interacting with each other during recording. Again, this is because of PulseAudio. It's the web browser interacting. Needs to be seen by OBS Studio. You have all your settings set in OBS Studio, all the sources. So OBS Studio is being fed by PulseAudio and your web browser. So all these things need to be happy together when OBS Studio is in record mode. And so when you click start record, then double check that. And that's what you need to see. In Shotcut, editing afterward, you import files by opening them. Again, it's terminology. Like scenes in OBS Studio are really profiles. It helps me. Importing files, you do that by opening them in Shotcut. And then the playlist is, it can function as a playlist. Why would you ever want to do that? You really are using the playlist in Shotcut as a staging area. And then you drag it to place in the timeline. One very important quirk about Shotcut is you cannot change the level order of layered tracks. This, just mark this down. I should have made that in bold. There's so many angry words in the forums about this. Not by me. I haven't posted anything, but I certainly felt it. You cannot change it. And the developers have said, I don't think it's important. Well, yes, it is important. OpenShot does it. You can't, I want to mention, I didn't want to put it in the slide, but I will mention verbally, the Shotcut MLT project file, that stands for Melty-Tech, the people who are the Shotcut developers, MLT file. It's an XML file, kind of similar in function to an Audacity AUP file, for example. It points to sources. By the way, don't move your sources from one folder to another because that'll mess up everything. You don't want to do that. It'll lose its way. So that XML file, you can hack the XML file to move a layer, a track from one level to another. I've done it. It's really fraught because there are a whole lot of loose ends you need to bring along with it. And then again, like any file that is edited by an application, and then you go in there and you manually edit with a text editor, you're probably asking for trouble. Yes, you can do it. I'm not sure that it's really practical to, because the way it's labeled inside that XML file, it really isn't very useful to know what is what in there. And if you wanted to, we could open up an MLT file and take a look at it in text editor, but that would be more just for academic interest rather than actually trying to do something with it. The last thing I want to leave you with is make sure to edit the whole video before exporting the audio, as described before. This lets you get all the audio lined up with exactly the video that you're actually going to export and publish. And then you can normalize the audio that matches that. To take out, denoise it, take out. So if somebody's in there and they put down their coffee mug just too loud, the only way I can think to do that is go into Audacity and just, blank that out for that session. Not delete it because it's going to mess your timeline up, but just reduce its level to, minus 60 dBFS or something. Would probably be the most practical way to do it. If you have somebody that puts their coffee mug down too hard too often, well, okay, that's that person's quirk, and that's kind of what that is going to be in that video. But and if you have it happening too often, you probably need to discuss that with that individual and say, hey, would you please mute your mic when you're doing that, or something. And that might be the human approach, might be the more practical approach than to trying to do that. So those are the main things. This is really cool stuff. I never really wanted to get into video. I was never really that interested in it. My daughter said that I should produce some videos, to match my the ebook I wrote a while back, and I got into that, and it was pretty interesting. And in the process, though, I needed to record web sessions, and so this I'm just sharing with you from my own experience. I'm going to go back to Zoom and unshare if I can find where. Oh, here, I stopped sharing. Here we go. I think I've stopped sharing now. So. Open for questions. Is everybody asleep?
Nope. So Roger, can you talk a little bit about from a when you are in the editor, the Shotcut, and you do rendering? Can you explain? Can you talk a little bit the rendering option or the export or whatever they want to call it?
Oh, rendering. Oh, right. Okay.
With your experience with that, how long does it take? Does it impact anything else running on your system?
Oh,
et cetera, et cetera.
Very good. That's a very good question. I did not address that directly. Let me try something here. Try sharing Shotcut so we can see what we're talking about. Okay, now let me go back to Zoom and let's see if I share screen, and I'm going to share Shotcut. Can everybody see the Shotcut share? Yep. Peter, do you see it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Let me bring up. Let me see if I can open a file. Open a file. Open a short one here. I'm going to look for an MLT file, and here's my overlay creation MLT file. I guess it does. Let's try the video source selection because that's short. Okay. Now I brought. Okay, here's my project, and look, you can see I've cut that. Look at all the places where I've cut. Can you see that? Now this is all one. Now there's no audio involved in here, But if I wanted to render that, I'm going to go up and I'm going to export it. Export is rendering it. But so that, and here are the little handles I was talking about. So I'm squishing my main area up. So I want to render it. I've tried different things. If I want to render this, I've found that I rendered it with the H264 high profile. Has worked out pretty well for me. So I want to render this file. How long is this little video? It's like 1 minute and 5 seconds long. So it's not going to take that long. And I'm going to show the jobs, these jobs over here in this area. So you'll get, let me squish the main area further here so you can see what's going on here. So I'm going to, I've already rendered this, but I'm going to render it to a different file name just for the sake of, so I'm going to say, you select, so I say export, I select, their stock defaults work pretty well. I've tried the WebM and the WebM VP9 trying to optimize for YouTube and all that. Their defaults are pretty good. Their defaults are pretty good. And of course, but if you're doing audio, of course, that's why I said, but I want to do this video. So high profile, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say export to a file. So I go down here to export file, and I'm going to take a, let's see here. Just going to call it test because, so I don't get it mixed up with anything. Now, before I click save, when I click save, watch over here where this, to the side here. I'm going to click save, watch what's going on. Watch what's, okay, it gives you the path it's saving to. It's showing you the progress. It should give me the percentage. I'm straining, usually it gives me a percentage.
That is a percentage. It's all
Say again?
There is on the right by the time, just before the time.
Okay, great. Okay, so my Zoom people is overshowing that. Now, right here, it's done because it was just a minute long. It gives you a check mark. So let me, if I were to go into, if I wanted to bring this into test MP4, I'm gonna open this file, and it shows it right now. Of course, I have it brings it in here. Now I'm gonna stop playing it. Let me resize my things here a little bit, and I want to make my thing bigger. See, this is a nice thing about this. You can choose what work areas you want to work in. So I'm going to pause this because I don't want it. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to grab it, left click it, and drag it into my playlist. There it is. See, there's the file name, test MP4. That's what I, so let me add a new video track. So I'm going to add a video track, and I added it down here on top. And so I'm going to drag this down here, and there it is. Now look at the difference. See, this is my original where I had all the different, now I haven't, now playing these two together, that's going to be interesting because well, what's going to be shown on top is the one I rendered, because what's down below is being blotted out by what's on top. Okay. So that's going, and you could use spacebar to start and stop. Now here's the playhead, and if I want to move, clicking down in a track doesn't move the playhead. If you want to move the playhead, you need to click on the timeline part with all the times in it, and you can see it instantly shows you where you are in the video. And I can hide this video, and I can make it visible. So those are other. I could also add an audio file if I wanted to. Did that answer the question, or was there something further? I guess, is there a follow-on question?
Mark?
Yes.
When you are rendering, if you are doing something else on your computer, will that interfere with the rendering? Like running multiple apps?
I think the answer to that is probably would slow down other applications that were processor intensive. I certainly wouldn't try playing a media file at the same time. I wouldn't be trying to edit audio or anything like that. On the other hand, I don't think there would be that much of a performance hit on the computer during the rendering or using another application if you were to do some simple web browsing while you were waiting on the same machine. You don't want to get up from this machine. You want to, but there's something you want to research, while you're waiting, or catch up on your email or something like that. That would take relatively few clock cycles vis-a-vis the rendering process. Of course, there's going to be, if you're competing for, what's the time sharing, a process, inside the processor, a clock cycle is going to do one thing. It's going to, handle a particular thread, and then the kernel gives it to another thread, and it does its clock cycle, and all the others are waiting in that particular core. And it's like, how well can your operating system handle multi cores? Can it handle all 8 cores on an i7 efficiently? Those are all open questions like that. From a practical standpoint, you could probably do web browsing, email checking, something like that while you're waiting for a video to render. So if you've already gone to lunch, you don't need to get up and go to lunch, do some other work. The answer is yes, you can. As long as that other application's not that processor intensive.
Good answer, thanks.
I'm going to go ahead and unshare this then again, unless there's something else somebody wants to show. We can bring it up again if we needed to. So,
can I ask a question, Mark?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I run Shotcut on a machine that I've got, and it was interesting you just mentioning about multi-threading. One of the issues I had was I had to reduce the number of threads that my machine was using because it was causing my computer to overheat and shut down partway through a render. I was wondering if you knew whether or not there was a way of getting Shotcut to do sort of like batch type rendering, that it'd be possible just to use a command prompt from the shell and then just tell it to render a particular project with some sort of low priority, and therefore use a less processor intensive way of rendering out a final job?
That's an excellent question. I have not looked into that. I don't know the answer. I'm not aware of a command line approach to Shotcut.
It wouldn't solve it that way, though. Right?
Say again?
That wouldn't solve it. Right? I mean, rendering is processor intensive by definition.
Oh yes, but
so the only way to really solve that is to start slicing your CPU into smaller pieces, like using C groups. And that just basically slows it down. What you basically are having is, if your computer overheats because it gets busy, then your cooling is bad. You need to fix that. It shouldn't.
I took it all apart. It's an HP. The one that I'm using for is an HP all-in-one computer. I spoke about it with the Shropshire lads a while ago. Took the whole thing to bits. All the fans are working. It's got built-in radiators and hardware conductors to take heat out, but nonetheless
it can be as simple as the thermal paste is not completely set and all that stuff, but it should never overheat because you go 100% on the CPU for a long time.
A related remark with another application I use that is very CPU intensive. I'm able to designate the number of cores I want to allocate for that application. And if there are, quote, too many, unquote, it screws up. I had to drop back from like 16 to 12 before the app would function properly. Strange, but true.
Yeah.
That was my solution on this particular computer. I dropped the number of cores. There is a setting for export in Shotcut in the advanced under the advanced tab, and it was to reduce the number of cores to a half. Well, I've only got 4 cores in this thing behind me, so I reduced them down to, would you believe it, 0, and it works.
And so that's one way if the app supports it. Otherwise, you need to have the OS constrain it. But again, in the end, well, this is when you do supercomputing and all that, this is one of the hard part to solve. Just because you have the capability of utilizing 100 cores, it doesn't necessarily mean the control plane can keep up with that. So you have to be careful how you slice, particularly if you want to use your computer for something else while it runs. So yeah, never use all cores if you still want to use your mouse and all that stuff. It's your computer needs time for other stuff.
The chain is good as its weakest link.
Yeah, this is why I love about Blender, because Blender, when it renders, can take days, and you
That's
can
it. That's processor intensive.
it is right, and in that case, you can actually set up a Blender farm, a render farm for it, because of this kind of stuff. But yeah, set up limitations on your code. That's the best advice. But fix your cooling. Even if you run 100% for a day, your computer should run hot, but not overheat. There's something wrong if it overheats.
Just don't use an all-in-one computer, I suppose.
Well, it shouldn't be, but it can be as bad as a bad heatsink, right? The heatsink may not be applied correctly, or there may be an airflow problem, maybe some dust in some vent somewhere that prevents the air from flowing through correctly, or maybe a stupid fan, a parameter in the BIOS is not allowing the fan to go to full speed when it needs to.
Could be. Yeah, I don't know how I'm going to get around that
Something
one.
like that.
Just use a different machine.
Right. Sometimes some people try to turn down fans because they make a lot of noise, and I can understand it. But if it means that it runs hot and you might even destroy your computer, it may not be a good idea to turn them down.
Yeah, computer components don't like overheating.
Nope.
A very basic question, and this is more very OpenShot related, Mark. One of the things I'm going to try to do when I post this video is put a short little intro screen just from a JPEG, or actually I'll probably use a PNG file. How would you do that in OpenShot? So if I want to take a PNG file and have it visible on the screen for like 30 seconds.
Let me show you. Let me open up OpenShot again and show you. Can I do that?
Yes, please.
That might be the easiest way to answer that question, because let's see, OpenShot. I think I still have it running. Let's see. Yes, I do. Excuse me, Shotcut. It's the same in OpenShot though. It's the same thing though. Let me go back to Zoom and let me share my screen and OpenShot. Here we go. Okay. I'm going to add a video track. So it is adding it to the top. It's still something you need. Oh, by the way, I'm scrolling with my mouse wheel. Wheel up, wheel down moves you to the future. Wheel up moves you to the past. So I got a new video screen here. So let me open up a PNG here. And this is a good place to, let me PNG. Gray line overlay PNG. So this will be good. Okay, let's try it. Okay, so I'm going to bring that up. Here's my gray line overlay. This is what my, so I'm going to drag this into my playlist and I stage it here. Now I'm going to take it and put it into my video thing over top. And so I'm going to move that to, let's just put it here. I'm going to put my playlist. This is what it's going to look like. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and hit play and watch. I'm going to bring this down a little bit so you can see the result. There it is. And the overlay just, so what you saw was the overlay overlaid it during the time that it was doing. Now I can stretch it to make it longer. So, so here I can put my playhead back here. watch when the playhead gets to the overlay. Now remember, what's up here overblots what's there, but since this has a transparency, the rest of it shows through. So here it goes. There it goes. And of course, all this other stuff is happening, but your overlay is still here until the overlay is not there anymore.
Okay,
And that,
cool.
so that way you could do that with your video at the beginning. If you wanted to do just say, for example, let me put my overlay, just add a little bit in the beginning here, so that maybe a little bit over. One thing I didn't talk about were transitions, but let's go back to this here. So, okay, you're going to start with the overlays. I think this is a use case you were talking about, John.
Yeah.
So here you have your image, and I would put it on the top. There you go.
Okay.
So there's another way you could do this too, if you wanted to. I can move this up here. Look what I did. Okay, now there should be a okay. Videos will transition. It's not working between. Oh, here we go. Image. You see that little thing there shows a transition.
Right.
So I think it fades or something. I'll see what it does. But you can tweak that. You can tweak what the transition is. See what it is? It faded out and faded the other one in.
Nice.
So it's kind of like, fade down, fade up type of thing. But you can do other things. You can make it do squirrely, squiggly lines or checkerboards. Well, I mean, those are different in the. Let me see if I can properties. I think I could go into transitions. Now I'm trying to find something. See, this is where why I do videos first. But you can get into the filters. Filters. Here we go. So if I select this and I got filters, it's somewhere in the filters. Transition. I want to add a transition. So you can do a brightness, fade in audio, contrast, gain, volume, size, position, rotate. That'd be interesting. And a rotate. Let's try that. That'll be fun. Let's see what that does. And so let's go ahead and play this. If it does anything to it. Whatever. See, that's where you have so many different options. And paying attention if you wanted to do that. I wouldn't see the use of that. I'm really not a fan of fancy for fancy's sake. But say you're doing an explainer video and you want an arrow to move from one significant part of the screen to the other. And maybe if you wanted to rotate or something from one point to another, then that you can do that with this. You would have to tweak it. Same thing as we were talking earlier. Handling the say with the audio filters, the band segment, mixer and that sort of thing. You're doing that kind of thing with it until you get it the way you want it.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I will practice with this video. So
you have all kinds of possibilities.
yes. Yeah, it'll be fun. All right. Any other questions? If you don't want to speak up, go ahead and throw them in the chat.
I was going to say, yeah, if you want to do something like have the arrows or little icons which move around,
right.
You can actually draw them possibly even as much as full screen on GIMP, and then just get the resizing and translation within OpenShot, and I presume with with the other application as well, and just move it around the screen. So and you can do that quite smoothly with a programmed line and whatever. So it's quite clever.
Exactly. And I have developed line arrows and things like that in Inkscape and as an SVG file so that you can scale it then export it to a PNG and move it in. And
but you've got access to Inkscape and Blender within the application, assuming that they're all installed. So you can actually just do all that within OpenShot itself and go from one to the other for titling and the likes.
I don't know. I guess you could. I've tended to work with the other applications separately and so I can tweak it. Like I work in Inkscape by itself separately, and then I save that, and then I import the PNG or whatever into it, and then I apply the whatever filter transition filters, meaning the turning or pointing or whatever.
Yeah, I've used the macros and whatever. They're quite useful. But as you say, sometimes it's handy to start with those and then edit further. But of course, once you're into the Inkscape from the application, it's just merely called it. Effectively, just shove the information down it, and you can just do what you want at that point. But yeah, if you stay with just within the macros, it can be a bit dry and a bit tedious, I think.
Oh no, I've always developed. I haven't really used, worked with macro. I haven't tried to do something from inside Shotcut or OpenShot. I've always created the different things in the separate applications, whether it's Inkscape or GIMP or
It's good to be quick, but it's not really. It's a bit I don't know, a bit cheesy, I think.
You do have more control by using those separate applications in their own environment.
Very much so.
Taking the result and then importing that into Shotcut or OpenShot, and it gives you a lot more control. Then you can apply more precise or more refined transitions in your video editor.
Yeah.
Fascinating subject. It's very useful.
All right. So does anyone else have any questions? If not, I will go ahead and stop the recording. So last chance.
Thanks, Mark, for a great presentation.